Hello YouTube, this is Matt Pullen, and this is another video in my analysis series on the GreenCastle-Indian Defense. The GreenCastle-Indian Defense is knight c6 here. If you'd like some more explanation on why I'm calling it that, then you should see the other videos in this series. But we looked at a3 and pawn to d5 already, and now we're going to look at another logical move, which is pawn to e4. Now pawn to e4 takes the whole center. There is significant cost in playing pawn to e4 because even though you control a lot of center squares, f5, e5, d5, c5, etc., you're giving up the d4 square. White will never be able to defend the d4 square with a pawn in this variation, and that can be very significant. For instance, one idea that I have here is that black can play e5 right away, which looks strange because you're moving a center pawn for the second time in the first 4 moves of the opening, which is definitely a violation of principle in itself. You're not moving another piece out. But you are challenging the center, and there's no move that challenges the center point to d4 like this move, pawn e6 to e5. And the idea here is that there's still a black pawn on d7, so black is not going to be exposed to a fatal queen to a4 check. If pawn to d5, then black can jump into the giant hole on d4. Now, white can play a3, and if black captures like he usually does, then he loses a piece because this knight has no squares. So the bishop has to drop back to e7. And now, let's see, what can white do? He will never be able to attack this knight on d4 with a pawn. So if he wants to remove it, he's going to have to use his pieces. Bishop to e3 does not succeed in getting rid of this knight because black can play pawn to c5. And now, if white ever takes on d4, then black will end up with a protected passed pawn on d4, which is a significant endgame advantage. So, if white captures en passant, then black takes with the d-pawn, and he's protecting d4 with the queen. So I think in this position, black is very comfortable here, because he has, for the foreseeable future, he has control over d4. For he can meet knight to f3 with bishop to g4. So, what else is there in this position? Knight to f3, and now the c5 defense does not work because of knight takes e5. So black must take, and now queen takes. And in this position, I think white may have an advantage because black still has this bishop on e7 that he hasn't managed to activate yet. Usually if black can set up a structure with all the center pawns on dark squares and he has this bishop traded off, then he's happy. But in this position, if bishop to g5 to attempt to trade off right away, black runs into tactical trouble. After bishop takes, queen takes, knight b5, threatening to fork on c7. So queen goes back to d8, and now pawn to d6. And seriously, black is uncomfortable here, because white is threatening knight to c7 check to pick up the black rook. And if this pawn capture instead, then white can play knight takes d6. And then he would capture on f7 and win the rook on h8. So bishop to g5 is a losing move. Black would need to be content with setting up this compact structure and trying to trade off this bishop later. And in this position, white just has tons of space. So the pawn to e5 is an interesting idea, but it doesn't quite work here because of the a3 and knight to f3 defense, or rather the attack. So instead, I've devised a new way for black to put pressure on white's center. And if you've seen the last video on the GreenCastle-Indian Defense, this tactic will look quite familiar. Queen to h4. This brazen, pawn-grabbing, queen sling out to the king side move. So, again, we're seriously violating principle. I mean, I would definitely not recommend teaching a beginner this opening, because we're doing so many things that are just not fundamentally good chess. But I think it's very interesting chess. Queen to h4, it puts serious pressure on e4, and the only move that can defend the material is queen to d3. We saw that in the past, white has defenses like bishop to d3, but he also needs to worry about the d4 pawn in this variation. So queen to d3, if he wants to hold on to the material, is forced. Now black has f5, and white has no way of holding on to e4 anymore, so he's got to take. Queen takes, and if white queen trades, then black threatens knight c2 check, and it's awful for white. So otherwise, black is just going to take on f5. So this capture is forced. And now, I think that d6, with the idea of playing bishop takes e6, is too passive, because white can force this queen trade and then castle and get the rook to the open e-file. And black, although he might equalize with good play, it's not comfortable. So instead, I suggest black play a gambit here. Capture on c3, forcing the crippling of the pawns, and then go to f6 with the queen. This threatens queen takes e6 check, so white is compelled to take on d7. And now bishop takes. Black is almost totally developed. He'll castle queenside and get his rook on the d-file, where the white queen is. White does have a bishop pair, and white is up a pawn, but white has these crippled pawns on the queen side. I think it's a very unbalanced game, fun to play for black. So a gambit way of playing this is to play knight to f3. This gives up the e4 pawn, because the knight is pinned. Bishop to e2, and now black just develops with knight f6. After castles, white is threatening knight takes queen, so black must take, and now black castles. And what do you think of this kind of game? White has two bishops. His pawns give him more control over the center, but black is up a pawn, and he does not have any serious weaknesses in this position for white to attack. Also, the development advantage is not that great for white. I mean, after two more moves, b6, bishop, b7, black will have his rooks connected. So I suggest after e4 that black take advantage of this unique situation and play queen to h4. If queen to d3, then black can get some good pressure on the white position. And if knight to f3, black can grab a pawn and try to consolidate to victory. Well, I will look at the most challenging move to the GreenCastle-Indian next. Have a good night.